Good evening, everybody. We are in Job chapter 40 and reading from verse 25 in the English Bible. But in the Hebrew Bible, it begins with Job 41. So just take note that this is chapter 40, verse 25. From here on, the Hebrew verses doesn't tally with the English. So we'll just focus on the English and I'll just net out the Hebrew as well. Verse 25 begins a new segment. Yesterday we were talking about the behemoth, and I had said that that would be a huge animal, the chief of the ways of God, the most important or the largest or number one in size with regards to the creation that God had made. And now we enter into verse 25 and of chapter 41 verse 1 in the Hebrew Bible, and we have a new animal called the Leviathan, the Leviathan. And the Leviathan is also a huge animal, but it's a very different animal. The behemoth is a gentle animal, but huge. The Leviathan is smaller, but fearful and fearsome. And so the question that God has posed to Job is this: can you drag out or pull out the Leviathan with a fish hook, or press down his tongue with a rope? Now, the idea here is to put a line in his tongue to hook it, right? Like you hook a fish. And so the idea here is, can you actually put anything into the mouth of the Leviathan? Now, I don't know how the Leviathan looks like, but it has big mouth and big teeth. And here, obviously, the answer is no. You cannot just hook a Leviathan like you hook a fish. Can you put a rope uh, in his nose and pierce his jaw with a hook, basically to pull the Leviathan? And the answer is no. This is a huge animal. You just don't do that with a hook and a line. Verse 3: will he make pleas to you, or will he speak to you with gentle words? Now, this idea here is that will he beg you or fear you? And the answer is no, obviously not. This is not the kind of animal that will play with you or discuss with you. Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him as a servant forever? The idea here is, will he make a covenant with you? Literally will say that in verse 28, will he make a deal? Will Can he be a servant? Will he be tame? Can he be domesticated? And all of this is a no. Is a no. Verse 5 says here, can you play with him like a bird, or tie him down for your young girls to play? Can he be a toy animal? And the answer is no. Will the traders bargain for him? Will they divide him among the merchants? Now, this one requires us a little bit of uh, a translation. It says here in this verse, will Can your friends, this one, make a bargain uh, for him? Really talks about the fact that can they can they trade him, right? Can they trade him? Uh, can the merchants trade him? Basically, can they cut him up and sell the pieces like how the fishermen would catch the huge tuna and cut it up into pieces to sell? Can you do that with the Leviathan? Can you fill his skin with harpoons or his head with fishing spear? The idea here is slightly different. Can you actually poke him, right? Can you poke him with barbs, with harpoons, or put his head in a fish bucket? Now, this one here, fishing spear, is a bit wrong. Is to put his head into, I guess you can say, a fish bucket would be a good word to use. Meaning, can you spear him like you spear a big fish? Can you cut him up, cut his head, and put him into a bucket? And the answer is no. This whole series of rhetorics is actually a no answer. Verse 8 here. Can you lay your hand on him? Remember the battle, and you will not do it again. Now, this one is a bit of a problem in the translation. So it says here, if you put your hand on him. Now, this one here is a bit problem. You will not remember the battle. Do you see this? If you put your hand onto the Leviathan, you will not remember the battle of trying to catch the Leviathan. Why? You will die. So, can you catch the Leviathan? The answer is no. This is chapter 41, verse 1 in the English Bible. So now we begin here. Behold, your expectation is false. Will you be hurled down even at the sight of him? The idea here is to tell the one who is trying to catch the Leviathan that your hope is in vain. That would be a better way of putting it. That your hope is in vain, that you will be, and this is a good word, you will be fallen at the sight of him. The moment you look at him, you be cast down. You'll be caused to fall down. And that's the kind of appearance that the Leviathan can create in the heart of man. And so the idea here is this: your hope to catch him is a lie. It is false, right? Uh, it is in vain. It is not true. So don't expect to catch the Leviathan. And so God begins to explain the logic behind all the rhetorics. He says, no one is so reckless that he dares to stir him. Who then is he opposes me? So it says here, no one will tease the Leviathan. because it's so fearful or fearsome. And so now God asks, then who can stand before me? Right? Who can stand in front of me? Who is able to do that? Who is able to stand to my face? That would be this word here. And so God now tells the logic, if you can't even dare go and catch hold of the Leviathan, then who are you to stand to my face to ask me questions? Next verse. Who has been first to me that I should repay? Whatever under the entire heaven is mine. Now this is important, and the concept of this looks at this way. This is not who has been first to me. This whole phrase is wrong. Who has been who has been anticipating or confront me, right? Confront me. If he's willing to confront me, then I will reward him for whatever under heaven is mine. And so the idea here is whoever confronts me or whoever anticipates me, or it also means whoever obeys me, God will reward him because everything under the entire sky is mine. The next verse, it says here, I will not be silent but his limbs or his mighty strength or his graceful frame. Now, what does this mean? I will not be silent or suppress his boastings. The story of his might. Now, this verse here is something which we need to be very clear. The story of his mighty strength, or in verse 12 here, it says, all the stateliness of his standing. Now, the idea of the stateliness of his standings would be the fact that his accomplishments. Now, what does this mean? It means this: if anyone is able to stand before God, if anyone is willing to obey God, then I will not be silent about his boasting because he is obeying God after all. If he's able to go and catch the Leviathan, so be it. That I'm not going to stand and block his story of his mighty strength. So that's the intent. God is saying, if you can do all these things, I'm going to reward you. But of course, you can't. And if you do, I'm not going to stop you from singing your own praises. So this is very much a picture of the fisherman who had caught his fish. And if he truly have caught the fish, God is not going to stop his boasting of whatever he has caught. Verse 13, who can strip off his outer covering? That is the outer part of his skin. Now, what does that mean? The outer part of his skin would be the surface of his This outer would be the surface. Who can actually uncover, this is uncover, the surface of his garment. Meaning the animal has a garment, and this garment is called scales. All right. And this is what we see. Who can pierce his double armor, his double bridle? Now, the idea of the double bridle would be to describe that he he has a mouth. Now you notice a bridle. This is who can undertake his double, not armor, but this is a bridle. And this would be his mouth part. Just like a horse, you put a bridle in the mouth. Who can insert a bridle into his mouth? Who can strip off the Leviathan of his outer garment, which is all scales and very tough scales? Who can open the doors of his face? Now, this is interesting. The doors of his face will be his lips. Around his teeth, there is terror. And so this would be the lips of the Leviathan. Or the doors of the face. And this is another continuation challenge of God to Job, who can actually pry open the mouth of the Leviathan. The strong scales are his pride. That would be his strength of his shield, right? And locked with a tight seal. What it really means is that the scales that it has are very tight one over another, which means that you can't penetrate, right? You can't penetrate. There is nothing in between, no space in between. One is so close to another that no air can come between them. This is basically this. It is a tight armor. They are joined to one another, they clasp each other and cannot be separated. Again, these three verses talks about the tightness of the scales. Now, this particular animal has scales, and so it's in the sea. So it's a sea monster of sorts. Verse 18. Now, verse 18 has some challenges in the translation. The translation would be this: his sneezes flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eye of dawn. This is about the eye. The eye is glowing. And so the moment he sneezes, that's the intent, then the waters parted and the eyes of the animal can be seen very brightly. And so that's the picture that is being discussed here. When he sneezes, the water parts and exposes the head with the eye. So it talks about the eye like the eye of dawn. And the eye of dawn is that it is glowing. It is not bright like a light, but you can see that the eye is glowing. It's a very unique animal, which we don't see today. From his mouth go burning torches. This would be flames. right? Verse 19 here would be flames. And sparks of fire leap forth. This is to describe that the Leviathan is a fire breathing dragon. Now, the word Leviathan is translated as dragon in the Greek. Leviathan is in the Hebrew. And so this is what people commonly call the Leviathan, a fire breathing dragon. And as you can see, sparks of fire leap forth. There's flames coming out. It's like torches. And the idea of torches here is flames of fire. Now, in the old days, torches isn't like a torch light. Torches means you've got a, a rod or a pole with something that will burn, right? Something that will burn, and that will become a torch. The torch is really a stick with a fire at the other end. And so burning torches really mean burning flames of fire. Sparks of fire will leap forth from the mouth. Now, obviously, up to this point in time, you're beginning to see that we have never seen this animal before. Perhaps in some of the movies that they many people think that they are just an imagination, but the Bible actually describes these kinds of animals. From his nostrils goes out smoke like a boiling pot and reeds. Now, this idea here is that this is talking about the smoke, right? The smoke. It's like a seething pot or a cauldron. So the nostrils of this animal will come out smoke. Okay. And that's the picture that we are going to get from this. And this animal is incredibly fierce, right? Incredibly fierce. And this is not a hippopotamus. This is not a crocodile. This is really an incredibly large and fearsome animal. The description is in this chapter. His breath sets coals aglow, and a flame goes forth from his mouth. Now, the idea of flame here again, this would be when he opens his mouth. I'll just draw this way. When it comes out of his mouth, there will be sparks of fire. So it's actually flame being thrown out like a spear. So this is the idea here. It's like a spear. And his breath will set coals aglow. And so it's that hot that will cause coals to light up. In his neck dwells strength, and dismay leaps before him. Now, the power of the animal lies in the neck. So the neck is not fat, the neck is muscular, it is very strong, and dismay leaps before him. This is worry. And despair or worry leaps away. So the whole idea here is The moment you see this animal and the strength of the neck, everything will run away. He is not afraid of anything. The folds of his flesh are joined together, firm, immovable on him. Well, this whole idea is that it is basically telling that these are muscular, right? Muscular, these are just words that talks about it. Muscular, strong, immovable, as the kind of an imagery that is driven out from these verses. His heart is as firm as a stone, as firm as a lower millstone. Now, this is another picture here. As you can see, the heart is firm. He is very steady, and his heart is not going to let him run away. Well, a lower millstone means this: there are two millstones. One millstone is firmly attached to the ground, right? Firmly attached to the ground. And this is the lower millstone. There is an upper millstone. The upper millstone is on top. The upper millstone is the one that moves. As it goes around, it will then grind the grain. And so the lower millstone is fixed, and the upper millstone is movable. And so the text is telling us that his heart is firm like the lower millstone, which is this part here. It's stuck to the ground. It's that firm that we're talking about, this idea of the Leviathan as a lower millstone. He's fearless. You will fear him, but he will not fear you. Verse 25, when he rises up, the mighty are afraid because of the crashing. They are bewildered. Now, this is something which we need to be, I think, a bit more clear. When he rise up from the water. Then the mighty are frightened. That's what it means. The very waves, the crashing, because of the crashing of the waves. Right? This is verse 25. The crashing of the waves, they are they lose themselves, they wander away. So lose themselves, run away. So the picture here is when the Leviathan rises up from the water, even the great and mighty animals will also run away. The waves that is caused by his rising up causes people to run away. Basically, that's the whole picture in verse 25. 26, the sword that reaches him cannot prevail. Now, cannot prevail means cannot destroy him. This is something which we need to understand. Uh, that if the sword comes to catch him, it will not prevail, will not destroy him, nor a spear, a dart, or the javelin. So basically, this verse is saying you just can't go to the Leviathan with any of the human apparatus. He regards iron as straw and bronze or copper as rotten wood. Now, the basic thing here is this: iron, javelin, or bronze or copper is treated as wood that will just break. Javelin is like straw because when you throw at him, well, it will break as well. The arrow cannot make him flee. A bow arrow cannot chase him away, cannot chase him away. So you cannot use bow and arrow. Sling stones are turned into stubble for him. Stubble here would be the idea of straw. It's like you throwing paper at the Leviathan when you have sling stones, right? This is clubs are regarded as stubble. Now in verse 29, uh, when he says clubs, in this case, it is actually a weapon. This is a weapon. The weapon are regarded as stubble or straw. He laughs at the rattling of the javelin. Now, rattling here is the swish or the sound, right? The sound of the javelin. This idea of the sound is the shaking or the rattling. And so when people in the old days they try to use the javelin, they will shake it and they will knock to the ground and it creates the sound. And with human enemies, they can go and fight a war. But with the Leviathan, it is meaningless. The Leviathan is not afraid. Verse 30 here. His underparts under his body are like sharp pieces of pottery. What does that mean? It means that under his belly, he has spikes. And that's what it means by shards of pottery. It's like pieces of pottery stuck to it. He spreads out like a threshing sledge on mud. He will just spread out on the mud and rest there like a piece of jagged rock. And so this would be, I think, verse 22 will be quite clear to tell us that the animal doesn't care about anything, doesn't care about anything. It will rest wherever it wants. He makes the depths boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a jar of ointment. Now, what does it mean? This is a sea creature. That's number one. In the fact of a sea creature, he can come up on the water and then you would see bubbles. And this is like boiling, right? He's breathing underneath and it's like boiling. He ferments the sea like a boiling concoction. So what you can see is he is causing the sea to have bubbles because wherever he travels underneath as he's breathing, you can see a trail of bubbles as if the sea is boiling. Behind him, he illuminates a pathway, one would think the deep, to be gray haired. And this is a very interesting, it's an imagery, by the way. And so if you see this as the sea, as the animal, let's say, like, I'll draw it this way. Don't know how it looks like, but if this is the animal, behind him would be a trail of bubbles, a trail of path, like an airplane or like a ship, as a speedboat that it comes by, you can see a trail of bubbles left behind. All right. bubble trail. And in that bubble trail, the picture it's saying here is that it thinks things at the deep and the deep sea to be gray haired. The bubbles are grayish in color. And so this is actually an imagery of showing that it is very quick in the sea. And as it traverses the sea, it will leave a trail. And in that trail, it's as if the sea has gray hair. That's a very interesting imagery, right? So the final verses that we see here is this. It says that nothing on earth is like him. All right. And God is saying, I have made him that nothing on earth can compare to him. This is what it means. It's like nothing in this earth can compare to him. He was made to be without fear. Now, this idea of without fear means he is not afraid of anything. He's not afraid. So, why did God make him? Well, that's God's wisdom. Why did God make the behemoth? God's wisdom. Why did God make this awesome Leviathan? God's wisdom. He looks on everything that is high. So the idea of high means it's elevated. He looks at everything that is elevated. On all the high things, I think you can see that. This picture here is all those that is exalted. All those who is in high position. He is king over all the sons of pride. And then we need to talk about this is an A and a B, basically. He is king over all the sons of pride. Now, this word pride is not in the negative sense of pride. This is about dignity, swagger, that you could be strutting around, and very much like a lion. When you've got the mane and you are walking around, king of the jungle, and you're turning your head left and right with your mane swishing back and forth, gives you this picture of pride, which is the dignity of the high haughtiness of an animal. That's what it means by high. That the animals at a high elevation, or considered a king of the jungle, for example. And so, on top of the king, he is king, the Leviathan. He is king over the kings. He is king over all those who have a certain pride in the jungle. There is no fear in him. So all this description is to tell us this. If you can find an animal that is fearsome, the Leviathan is more fearsome than he. And God made him. And so at until verse 34, right here, we are now given a very incredible picture of a sea monster, a fire-breathing dragon, something which nobody can tame or catch, called the Leviathan. And what is the intent of God giving this? Two animals. The behemoth, yesterday we read, huge, the biggest in terms of size, but it's like an ox. It eats grass. Really strong, not afraid of anything. But the animals are not afraid of it either. Today, we look at the Leviathan, big sea creature that can swim through, not afraid of anything on earth. No one can catch it. And it is the king of all the animals that think they are king, basically. And God made it too. Two very different kinds of animals to give us the picture that there are situations in Job's life that he can see that we cannot explain. And so, as we conclude chapter 41, we are made to understand God answering Job's two questions. Why do righteous people suffer? Why do wicked not get punished? And God used the behemoth, and it's so strange an animal, but huge and big. And then God used Leviathan, so fearsome and terrible and awful. And yet both were made by God. And the answer is not for you to understand, perhaps. That you can't come to the understanding that it's God who made these two so different animals, and yet no one can catch it and no one can understand it. And at the end of chapter 41, it would be Job sitting back and shaking his head, uh, that he is at a loss to 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 say any more, because God has very much shut him up. That everything that God has said in using descriptions and using illustrations is to point out to him that there's so much that you don't understand. There is so much that you don't understand why God did all these things, and yet they are all in cohesion. They are all in tandem. They are all balanced in this world. And God is watching over all of these. And with this, we come to the end of chapter 41 today. So we have come to the end of God's description and prophecy utterance to Job.